Joining us now is Charles Sennott. He's the executive editor of GlobalPost, the online international news website. And Gideon Rose, he is the managing editor of Foreign Affairs magazine. Nice to see you both. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Martin.
Let's begin with Afghanistan. We had this general shakeup. David McKiernan is out, and we have Stanley McChrystal, Lieutenant General, is now in. Seems that you had the conventional general removed and the unconventional general has been put in his place. Is this a sign of a new strategy, or should we be alarmed by what we've just seen?
I think it is a sign that the Obama administration has recognized that a conventional approach is not going to work in Afghanistan, and the perils of a conventional approach in a very complex counterinsurgency campaign were illustrated in Farah, where the airstrikes killed at least 100 civilians, apparently. They're still investigating, but the Afghan investigation has said 117 civilians were killed accidentally in the airstrikes. And I think there is a growing recognition, led by General Petraeus, that what they face in Afghanistan with the coming surge of 21,000 troops is a very complex counterinsurgency campaign that's going to need someone who thinks outside the box like McChrystal.
All right, so I should feel good about what just happened.
I think you should. I mean, McKiernan's a good man and a good general, but he might not be the right guy for the time. And McChrystal, who's also a very good guy and a very good general, might be a better fit. The guy's a fanatic exercise nut. He's a really interesting, funny, decent man as well. I happen to know him when he was a fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. But he got all the skills that are needed to fight this kind of conflict or to run it. And the fact is, this isn't a command you'd wish on your worst enemy, let alone a friend. But if anybody can try to turn it around and make some progress, I think McChrystal might well do it.
Well, we're 7 years or more into this conflict, and now we seem to think we've got it right.
Hey, it took you several years in Iraq, so if he can pull off anything like in Afghanistan what Petraeus pulled off in Iraq, then...
Gideon, I worry about that. I worry about the idea that they're going to try to take the lessons that were well applied in Iraq. I really think that General Petraeus' surge worked, and I really think that McChrystal played a key role in that, in special ops, and in really, really intense intelligence on the ground. But I think there are very few lessons that apply in Afghanistan.
That's right. By every account, this is a vastly different kind of conflict.
It's urban versus village and rural. It's really
I agree,
different.
but these guys, Petraeus, McChrystal, they're not morons. They know that as well as we do.
Right.
And I think that they are going to try and come up with responses for the local situation that are appropriate to Afghanistan, not simply replay things from Iraq.
I think that's true, and they are far from morons. In fact, I think that one of the great things that General Petraeus has done is bring this real intellectual rigor to the military. Both McKiernan and McChrystal are examples of that, particularly McChrystal. But I think that still, I of course think if it's good for Afghanistan and it's good for U.S. troops and it's good for the world, we want the presence there to succeed in reducing the violence. But I think they have a long, long way to go to understand the complexities of tribal loyalties, of ethnic terrain, and this is to be fought in some of the most remote and rugged and difficult terrain you can possibly fathom.
And that's been spoken of, that this is not a change that suddenly is going to bring an end to this conflict. It is just a new strategy for the years, and that's the term that's been used, that lie ahead. Let's move on to Sri Lanka. This is a story most Americans have not followed. They do not really understand this conflict, but we do, or we have become very aware that there's a huge human catastrophe potentially playing out there with thousands and thousands of civilians trapped between the government forces and the the Tamil Tigers as they put up their last stand. Is there a role of the United States? President Obama came out this week. He made a very clear statement. He said that both sides need to stand down. What should the U.S. do here?
Look, this is the bitter end of a very, very bitter war.
But it's taking so long.
Well, and you know what? When you have ethnic nationalism and you have suicide bombers among your insurgents, the Tamil Tigers, and you have a government that wants to finish it off finally and feels that earlier peace overtures have gotten nowhere, there's a lot of bad blood on both sides that is causing new blood to be spilled. So
but do we just stand by and watch these civilians die without?
Well, no, and in fact, Secretary Clinton was saying that maybe we should hold up an IMF loan or delay it until the government eases up a little bit and lets some civilians out, although it wasn't quite as explicit as that. And that may be something. But the real tragedy here is the Civil War itself. And frankly, the more interesting question to me is, when the government finally wins, will it have the magnanimity to treat the former enemies generously and put the whole conflict behind them?
And that's exactly where the U.S. can begin to apply some leverage, is beginning of thinking of the aftermath of this bitter, brutal last phase of a terrible war. And I think I would be so bold as to say I don't think the U.S. has a role in actively playing a part. I think it has a role in the diplomacy that will be needed in the aftermath. We can't be everywhere. We're in Iraq, we're in Afghanistan, we're in the seas off Somalia.
Right.
We can't be everywhere, and I think it's a mistake to think we should be.
Well, speaking of everywhere, the Pope seemed to be everywhere, at least in the Middle East, when it came to his first official visit there as Pope Benedict. He went in with Jews angry at him. He went in with Muslims angry at him. That is always a diplomatic minefield to navigate the Middle East. So, Gideon, how did he do?
Well, you know, you have to think of this as having several different constituencies in the region, right? The Pope had the Christians at hello. He did better with the Muslims this time, sort of walking back some earlier speeches of his, which seemed to be a little more aggressive, and so now he did a good job with the Muslims. With the Jews, not so much. The fact is, I don't care who you are, if you remember the Hitler Youth and if you're known to be soft on Holocaust deniers, it might be a good idea when you go to Israel to talk very emotionally and effusively about your support for the Jewish state and its safety and its security. And he didn't give that kind of emotional appeal, and so the Jews are a little skeptical. So,
Charlie, you get the last say.
Well, I would say that I don't know that he did have the Christians at hello, because the Christians are Palestinian. And they care a lot about justice, and they care a lot about that message coming from the Pope. And there was some frustration that that wasn't voiced as well. So I don't think he made any steps very well here. I think he's had a papacy where he's stumbled quite a bit. He's certainly offended Jews. He's offended Muslims as well. This is a papacy that sadly is very awkward and occasionally clumsy. I think the counterpoint here is Pope John Paul II's trip to the Holy Land.
Tough act to follow.
Tough, big shoes to fill.
everybody loved him.
And what I love is the shoes. This Pope has restored the ancient tradition of red shoes for the Pope. John Paul II just wore good walking shoes, and he left a much better imprint in the Middle East.
We have to leave it there. Charles Sennott, Gideon Rose, thank you both.